Split Second is a game that is very near and dear to my heart. A game that fell under that ahead of its time category of video games. Games that really pushed forward the boundaries of what back then's hardware could withstand, and the way the game would play, and pretty much just around everything. Now, this is a very near and dear game to my heart. It's one of my favorite games, my top favorite games. And by today's standards of how car games and just video games in general are going, it kind of puts a contrast of where we are now and where we were back then. But for context sake of this video, let me just read up a little bit about it for you. Split Second is an arcade racing video game developed by BlackRock Studio and published by Disney Interactive Studios for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360. Announced on 11th March 2009, the game was released on 18th May 2010 and was later released on live in June 2011. In the game, players take part of a fictional reality television show consisting of a variety of events, each focusing on destructible environments triggered remotely by driver actions known as power plays. Split Second was ported to PlayStation Portable in November 2010 by Sumo Digital. Now, honestly speaking, this game, when I first bought it, I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away at how good the graphics was. This was a game that really used its graphics and its engine to the best of its ability. Now, this game was not by any means or was not in any way, shape or form the absolute best video game and the most realistic video game, but it was sort of a home away from home for someone who was looking for something different in such a market of racing, especially someone who didn't want the conventional Need for Speed, who didn't want the conventional Forza or Gran Turismo video game, someone who wanted just wanted something different. Now, this is pretty much a car carnage game. This is a high octane action video game, racing game, and it had a really sad fate because I don't understand how the game didn't really sell well, because if you check all the scores on Metacritic, which I'll put up on the screen simultaneously, if you check all the Metacritic scores, they had pretty good meta scores and user scores. This was a good game, and honestly, this game has garnered a pretty decent fan base over all these years. And that being said lightly, because I think this is a game that anyone would enjoy. Besides the PSP port that didn't really do too favorably well. I mean, for PSP game, it had a pretty good user score, and honestly, I think anyone who would play this game would enjoy it. Now, essentially, this game was a good game by itself, and it being warranted that it could be a good game that could stand alone. But what this game needed was a pretty good sequel, and the place where it lacked character and soul, in the sense of having a good storyline. Essentially, the storyline is you just have this elitist, racing group that is like the big dogs, essentially. Now, with that, essentially the game is you just have to beat all of them. You have to beat one of them individually until you win the whole thing, and then you get every single car. It's almost essentially like the Blacklist, or it's essentially just like the Blacklist or Raven West from Grid. So essentially the Blacklist of Need for Speed and the Raven West of Race Driver Grid. Now, with this game, let's talk a little bit about it. Now, essentially, what happened is that here's what happened. On 30th June 2011, Disney Interactive Studios announced their intent to enter a consultation process on the proposal to close the studios. It was later confirmed that the studio had been shut down and that several 300 ex-employees have been formed new studios, including Studio Gobo, West Pier Studio, Round Cube Entertainment, Short Round Games, and Boss Alien. Now, because now the company or the game developer in question is called BlackRock. It's called BlackRock Studios. Now, essentially, what happened was that they essentially got cancelled, or they got fired. Now, BlackRock Studios has made a huge range of games. Specifically, that for PC, they made the Pure, which is an ATV, stunt game, and then they made Split Second. Now, I'm not going to talk about Split Second for a second. Split Second was essentially it played like an arcade racing. It felt like an arcade racing game. It looked like an arcade racing game. But if you play the game, it felt more reminiscent of Burnout Paradise. Burnout Paradise was huge in its day. Burnout Paradise, I think, came out a year or two before, or round about the same time period as Split Second. Yes, so Burnout Paradise essentially came out in 2008, and this was essentially where this game got a lot of its influence from, except for the power plays being of where you could make the whole environment destructible. You could even switch this track up and whatnot, and it would essentially be a fight to the finish. And with this game, you wouldn't really focus on winning the race, you just focus on looking around, because there's so much you could miss because the cars are going so fast and everything. Now, like the gameplay and physics, as I said before, it handles more or less like a Burnout game, like Burnout Paradise, for example. But this game has no licensed vehicles, which is actually like the Burnout game. Burnout doesn't have any licensed vehicles. I don't think Burnout has ever had any licensed vehicles, to my knowledge. But it would have been cool to, be driving a Lamborghini and then get hit by some crane dropping a huge load of metal beams, and you getting impaled like Swiss cheese. But let me continue. So the game doesn't have any characters or really that much of a storyline. Essentially just beat some elitist race group until you get all of their cars so that you can race the game. The game has pretty good decent replayability. It even had a lot of huge DLCs in it, to be honest, for especially a game that didn't have that much of a lifespan. And the game even had a 2-player split screen, which me and my friend actually played. We sat there with 2 keyboards and played with a 2-player split screen. It was crazy back in the day when we first played it. And talks of a sequel have been around, but unfortunately the truth is that there was never going to be anything of a sequel, because this is what happened. After finishing episode 12, a cutscene is shown in which power plays in the city are activated by unknown perpetuators in construction vehicles, followed by a black screen reading to be continued. However, in May 2012, Eurogamer spoke to an anonymous source that confirmed Disney Interactive Studios had made a reduction of BlackRock Studios' workforce due to Disney's new management. The game was cancelled in December 2010 despite attempts to fit with their new business model. Now, as you can see, the game was killed off essentially, and there's been remnants of this game in other things, but the damage models and everything, this game was pretty much a one-off. And this game, for it being as back as far then, it had good physics, and it had good drift physics. It was break to drift, but believe you me, you could wrap the car around the corner pretty decent. This game handled almost exactly like Burnout Paradise. If Burnout Paradise had a distant cousin, this would literally be it. But unfortunately, that's the conclusion of Split Second. It just got killed off, like many of the other great games we've had, specifically in the let's just say the 2006 to the 2010 era. After a lot of these good games that we had got killed off. So it's very unfortunate. It's very sad. It's a real tearjerker, bloody blah. But yes, this was a game I played and finished, and it will never be like any other. It is still available on Steam up until this day, but the PC version is pretty horrible so far as I've heard. But anyway, I thank you so much for watching. This is the Cherry Man signing off. Peace out.